Hello everyone, welcome to the fourth development lesson. Last week, you should have learned how to create methods in Java and submitted the homework in the Google Forms. Today, we will be teaching you guys about if-else statements. If-else statements are fundamental in any programming language, as they allow for any decisions to be made within the program. For those who already have experience with programming, this might be very familiar to you guys. Sometimes, in a program, we don't want certain code to run unless a certain condition has been met. For example, if there is gas in our car, then it can move. If there was no gas in our car, then it cannot move. The code that makes the car move will only have to be run when the computer knows that there is gas in the car. This checking process is done through if-else statements. We already know how to assign different values to variables, but the useful part is only when we can compare these values to determine a path for the program to go in. For now, Samesh will explain how if-else statements are structured within a program.
So today we're going to be learning how to make if-else statements. So it's kind of similar to making a method. It's going to involve like enclosing something with a curly bracket. So let's get straight into it. So right off the bat, I'm just going to make a method, and to do so I'm just going to public void, and we're just going to call it height checker. Awesome. And then we're going to obviously run height checker in our main command. Oh, whoops. Alright, so now that we have our first method, obviously we know that it's going to execute height checker, and then it's going to execute whatever is inside of these two curly brackets over here. So let's make a bit more space because we're going to put our if-else statement right over here. So essentially the first part of the if-else statement is the if, which is literally just typing the word if. And then after the word if, we want to have something called a parameter. Essentially, the parameter is in brackets. It's enclosed in these small brackets here. And what the parameter does is it compares two values. And whatever the outcome is, it will either select true or false. For example, if I do if 2 is greater than 1, the output that comes out of this bracket is true because 2 is always greater than 1. So if true, and then the following code will execute. So for example, I would then put another bracket here like this. Just press enter, and then the following bracket will close for you. So what we essentially did is if 2 is greater than 1, the following code inside of these brackets are going to execute. And make sure not to confuse these brackets with the brackets of the entire class, because if you have multiple if statements within a method and then you have like multiple methods within like the actual class, things can get confusing, which is why in the NetBeans program all you can do is just select a bracket and you can see where it has opened and closed. So over here we see that, okay, well, if 2 is greater than 1, we can just say something like system.out.println good job, right? And obviously end it with the semicolon. So this isn't really that useful, as we mentioned before, because why would we even want to write something like this? 2 is always going to be greater than 1, no matter what we do. So what if we had a variable to compare instead? So within the method, we could probably write something like, I don't know, so int, and then we can just call it height equals 150. So the value of height is now 150, and then all of a sudden we can write height is greater than 1, and as you can see here, it works, and we have a variable that we can change, and we can see if the statement will be true or not. And in this situation, the statement is true. Height is greater than 1 because height is 150 and 150 is greater than 1. Hence, when I click run on this program, it's going to run the height checker program. So it's going to do everything over here. And it's going to set the variable height to 150, and it's going to check if 150 is greater than 1, and if it is, it's going to execute this code. But what if height is not greater than 1? For example, what if we did like 160? Alright, so if this condition, this parameter is not met, it no longer is true, it becomes false. And when whatever is inside of these brackets becomes false, whatever follows afterwards will not execute, meaning this good job will not execute. And in fact, let's make it something more easier to understand. So you are tall enough to ride this ride, or not ride this ride, like go on this ride. So it's like checking to see if you go on a roller coaster or something. So as you can see here, if you want to set it so like, okay, the minimum height to go on this roller coaster is 160, any height above 160 is what's acceptable. And if you're above that height, then congratulations, you can go on the ride. But what if you're not? What's going to happen then? Well, if I run this program, nothing's actually going to happen. You're good. Just see that literally nothing runs if it loads. Yep. Literally nothing happens. So obviously the user is going to be confused and they're going to be wondering, well, what the heck just happened? Did it even run properly? So obviously you need to have something called an else statement that is a part of the if-else statement. So right after your first bracket and opening your closing bracket for the if part of your statement, you can then write else. And for the else component, there is no parameter. So all you have to do is type else and open the bracket and close the bracket again. And as you can see here, we now have our full if-else statement. If height is above 160, this will execute, and if it's not true, then whatever is inside of here will execute. And obviously you don't need a parameter in this situation because, well, obviously, you know, if it's not this, then it has to be this. However, we're going to teach you guys something about like if-else statements on a bit more advanced level a bit soon. But for now, let's just quickly just, you know, write something else like system.out.println you are not tall enough. And then I can just do this. Alright, awesome. So now when we run it, it says you are not tall enough, which is exactly what we wanted. And then all of a sudden, if I change this, so if I put it to like 170, I click play, it says you are tall enough to go on this ride. So right off the bat, you can see how useful it is. And what makes it even more useful is, you know, even in this situation, we can even test it twice and see how as the variable changes, the contents of the if-else statement will change as well. So like we can just call it, you know, new height. So proper formatting, you want to start with lowercase. So new height, and then, you know, your new height suddenly becomes like 100. You shrink a lot for some reason. And then you copy and paste the same code. And right over here, you can see our if-else statement again. And you can see how it's going to change. You are tall enough to go on this ride. You are tall enough to go. Wait. Oh, yeah, right. Obviously. My bad. Obviously, you'd also have to change the variable as well. Like this. And now you can see the two different contrasting outcomes. Alright, so there's another aspect of the if-else statement that I haven't talked about, and that's the else if. So for example, once you have your first if part, what if you don't want to just go directly to the else? What if you have other potential options? Because it's not only two different options. It's not only, well, yeah, if your height is above 160, you can go on this ride. What if it's something? What if you want to add like another message? To do this, to add another parameter, you have to write else if. And what else if does is, and then you would put your parameter. And what else if does is it adds basically a new parameter or a new potential option. You can basically look at these else statements as like trees with like different branches. When you guys take the grade 10 computer science course, you guys are going to do a lot of tests with these if else statements, and you're going to have to like map out like a tree based off of what your if else statement looks like. And you can consider each of these kind of blocks of code as its own branch. So for example, now we want to do something like, all right, if height is less than 5. So if height is less than 5, you know, obviously no one can be less than 5 centimeters, right? So we just want to say something like, what the heck? Obviously this is just like a little silly response, but it obviously adds a different dynamic, because if you put a height less than 5, it's going to output this response. And if you put it above 160, it's going to output this response. And then you can even do it again. If height is like, I don't know, like greater than 2000. What? Are you for real? Like that. And then you can put like a real else statement. And now let's run it. So we had the height at 170, so it goes through this entire program and it says, okay, if the height is greater than 160, it is. So we're going to execute this. Does it satisfy this? No. Does it satisfy this? Nope. And obviously it doesn't need to enter the else statement. So it only executes this one line of code. So what if I did something like 3000? Then what? As you can see here, even though our height is 3000, it only executes one code, the first one. So it immediately looked at the statement over here and it said, well, if height is greater than 160, we output this. And once it outputs it, it's going to ignore the other ones. Over here we have, if height is greater than 2000, what? Are you for real? But it never outputted this because it had already outputted this over here. Which is why it's important you sometimes need to make multiple if statements for you to run through different things instead of just putting it into one if statement. And then obviously, you know, when you do something like you put your height as 3 and then you run it, it does the what the heck, are you even human? It ignores this and it goes into this. And then if you put, you know, anything in between, like 50, it will just give you a normal response, like you cannot go on this ride. So that's kind of the trick with if-else statements. If you wanted to output both of them, we couldn't really do it in this situation. What we'd have to do is something like this. Hang on. We have to put a new if statement, and it goes if height is, what was it? If height was greater than 2000. But are you sure you're human? Like that. And when we do something like this, you can now see how this is going to get executed and this is going to get executed. And let's just put our thing as 2000. And let's run it. And now you can see, you know, both of the output has been outputted. And that's kind of how you play with if-else statements, and you make them output what you want them to output. Alright guys, for your homework, I want you guys to create a program that tells you, with the input will basically be a mark, and it will tell you if you've passed the course, and then it will tell you if you got honors in the course or not. So for passing the course, it will do like an if this mark is above 50, you pass the course. And then you'd have another if-else statement that says, well, if you got over 90, you got honors. So something like that, just make an if-else structure that can output both of this information. And if you want, you guys can actually add more stuff as well, like for example, if the user outputs a number above 100, say that's not a valid answer. Alright guys, thank you guys so much for listening to today's homework. It could be a bit slow, or not today's homework, like today's lesson. It could have been a bit of a slow lesson for, you know, anyone who's already familiar with programming. And next week we're going to get into the good stuff, and we're going to be talking about, you know, user input and like in a real GUI setting. And we're going to kind of like skip a few steps and kind of just like get straight into it. And we'll learn as we go along, because that's the easy part about NetBeans. I feel like it's just really easy. Like once you get into the hard stuff, it's kind of easy to notice the easy stuff in there as well. So thank you guys so much for paying attention, and I'll see you guys in the next video.